Well, this is the first post show, I guess, that we have recorded. So, Professor Dr. Rick Repetti, thank you for being here. Appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. We won't keep you much longer, but
I don't
is
believe it.
well, uh, is there anything that we did not touch on that you would like to discuss? We were just scratching the surface of woke culture, and we even discussed the some of the institutions that take money for Black Lives Matter movement and from where they're taught and what they're taught and what their agendas are. But we can discuss that topic or anything else that you thought you wanted to elaborate on and did not get a chance to talk about during the show.
No, I don't. I didn't walk away thinking there was something I need to get back to. That happened during the episode where I said, if we don't finish this, it might be taken out of context. But I
Right.
brought the context up after that, which was the studies about, replication crisis and the two levels of research where you
Right.
get the things approved in advance and everything. So I'm happy with, I don't think I left any things dangling that might be misunderstood. But of course, when you talk about those topics, people almost intentionally misunderstand them. Uh,
Right.
cancel culture stuff.
So
It's very polarized issues, so people come down very strongly on both sides of them, no matter what anybody says.
right, and so tell me a little bit about your experiences online because I know you have several instances where people have gotten the torches and the pitchforks out to come after you online because of the comments you have made. Many of them innocent, or many of them just sharing facts, and non-harmful, non-attacking opinions.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of times I'll read something interesting, which is some kind of minority view about something. By minority, I mean something like it's not popular or it's unusual or it's not being reported in the mainstream media or something like that, or it just catches my eye and I'll share it. It's kind of sharing to save or read later or whatever, and so it's somewhat irresponsible. Some people argue that whenever you post something, if you are a kind of public figure or even just a professor or whatever, you post something, you didn't fact check it, that's ethically irresponsible or something like that. I get a lot of pushback on things that I just share. And when I first started doing that, like sharing articles and things that I thought were politically or philosophically or culturally worth sharing, whether I read it or just the headline caught me. In the beginning, a lot of people would take me to task on it, and so I would go through great lengths to try to defend myself. But I realized after some time that I don't have to do that.
Why is that? Why did you come to that realization?
Yeah, because I realized that any opinion that was even able to be cast as politically incorrect would be jumped on by people who oppose those views. Mm-hmm. And like I've experienced repeatedly, people challenging me, posting contrary views, links to contrary stuff, and trying to engage me in debate. And like, it's just a wormhole that
Right.
I don't have time to go down. I'm a busy person. So I just would share things that I think are interesting that I don't see other people sharing. I'd find it on some of my other feeds or whatever and share it on Facebook or Twitter and just get so much. It's almost like a pile-on thing where all the social justice warrior types or woke types just come out with their pitchforks accusing you of being irresponsible, of not fact-checking, demanding that you explain the positions in the article, and just say, hey, I'm just curating stuff. That doesn't mean that I necessarily believe everything in the article, or I might have skim read it or just read the abstract or whatever, and it's just something worth sharing. Feel free to say what you want about it, but I just gave up on feeling like I have to act like I'm the advocate for the author of the article. And a lot of the criticisms just pissed me off, to be honest with you, to speak, in Brooklynese, pissed me off because it'd be like, just like unfair kind of criticisms. Like, one of the standard, like I realized that there's a kind of standard series of, like, they're almost out of a playbook, of ways of just trying to disparage those kinds of things that I would post, like citing the publication, like say it was Breitbart News, right, which is a right-wing thing, or some other right-wing publication or conservative organization that did the research or whatever, and that would be presented on my feed as if that was automatic proof that it was untrustworthy.
Right.
This is absurd. I mean, things are published by left-leaning organizations. The New York Times is extremely left-leaning, but that doesn't mean that everything that they publish is ideologically biased. Lots of it is.
Right.
So the question is, are you capable of assessing the content of this article without pulling what's a kind of ad hominem? An ad hominem fallacy is when you redirect an argument to the credibility of the arguer. You say, oh, well, Donald Trump said that, and he's a moron, he's an orange, buffoon, or whatever it is,
right.
This kind. That's a kind of ad hominem, which in Latin means to the man. You've changed the subject from the argument and assessing its merits to who made the argument, right? Now, you might be on LSD, or you might be, a communist, or whatever category that I dislike, but does the argument has merit to it, or it doesn't?
Right.
So that one of the standard things is to critique the author, the venue, like to just do guilt by association. That like that's a right-leaning thing or something. It's a right-leaning organization. It's a right-leaning publication. It's a right-leaning newspaper, whatever it is, as grounds for dismissing it. I'm sorry. And, that's just like one out of a whole litany of these kinds of maneuvers that people would try to engage me with. And I just wasted so many hours of my life arguing with people like that, explaining that that's a form of ad hominem, or and then getting into debates with them about, information literacy, like if something is from the National Enquirer or something, or, Nazi News or something like that, then you should be aware of what the source is. It's just like an endless series of debates. I don't reason in those ways. Right. I take people's arguments, regardless of who they are. Mm-hmm. What's your evidence? What's your reasoning? And we deal with that. And that's part of the belief in free speech, right? So that's one of the kinds of things that happen to me a lot on social media. And I still get sucked into these arguments. But a lot of time, it's ad hominem, it's guilt by association, it's some kind of mockery, caricature, straw man. Oh, that's like saying this worst thing, which is this obviously bigoted thing, or something like that. And it's just like an endless series of these kinds of, they're fallacies. Most of them are sophistries. Like I believe, I said I don't like to accuse individuals of having intentions that I can't prove. But when you deal with certain individuals who, no matter what you post, they come in and they do this to you, they might even be bots, they might not be real.
Right.
But whether they're human or algorithmic, if they're that ideologically biased that you can never reason with them without this kind of nonsense endlessly coming up, I realize after a while that it's a waste of time to try to argue with somebody if there's no moving the dial on them. Like I know that a few years ago, in 2016, I voted against Trump, right? My views have changed radically in the last few years. My belief about that is if somebody doesn't remember the last time that their important beliefs changed, then maybe their belief-forming mechanism is stuck. That's what dogmatism means, right?
Yeah.
So, and the analogy that I like to make, I don't know if I made it in your class because yours was a specialty course, but almost all my intro students in philosophy, I make this analogy with them on day one or day two, with the weather vane. A weather vane, when it's working, it detects the wind and it points in the direction of the wind. If you covered it, the weather vane on top of the house, north, south, east, west. If you covered it with a glass dome, it wouldn't move anymore. Or if it was frozen or rusted, it would be stuck, pointing to where it last worked, right? That's what dogmatism is like. So wind in the analogy is evidence, new evidence or new reasons. If you present somebody with really good evidence and good reasons for them to move their dial a little bit and they never move it, they're stuck.
Right.
Right? Their epistemology is frozen. That's dogmatism. And a lot of these ideologues, woke ideologues, there's no reasoning with them. I mean, there's people on the right like that, but they don't bother me.
Right.
Even when this is a curious thing because I believed for the longest time that people on the left were more open-minded than people on the right, because people on the right are conservative.
Right.
And conservative means they're committed to certain views and values, and that's it. But once I shifted my views so that they're more in the middle, center-left, generally, I'm still like pretty lefty in many of my thoughts, but I'm more libertarian and et cetera. As soon as I move the dial in the other direction at all the lefties give me a hard time.
Yeah.
The conservatives don't give me a hard time about my lefty views. You can reason with them. This is very
not
straight.
all of them.
No, not all of them, and there are lunatics on both sides. But because there's woke culture is becoming so widespread in the culture, right, that I get so much grief from those people that I never expected that. So that's the kind of thing that happens to me on social media. And I wind up blocking people after a while. When I realize this person is just nasty, they're insulting, they're accusative, they just treat me poorly repeatedly, no matter what they throw at me. I try to be rational and reasonable and explain and defend myself. Now I realize, you know what? This is almost like some kind, I don't know what it is, but it's an effort to just silence people who have opposing opinions. And I'm no longer going to take that, like those accusations. I don't feel like I have an obligation anymore to defend myself against nonsense. So,
let me just pause one moment.
Sure.
Good. All right.
Okay, so yeah, I've come to the conclusion that it's false. It's like, instead of allowing other people to make nonsense up, that puts me on the defensive, so that I'm endlessly defending myself against false accusations, misinterpretations. They seem to be willful and intentional. I don't do that anymore. So it's like, let me give you one very straightforward example. If somebody comes out of the blue and accuses me of being a white supremacist because I'm white, I will not defend myself. I will outright call them a racist, because they're assuming on the basis of my skin color that I'm a racist, and I will accuse them of being a racist. And they have no evidence that I'm a racist, but I've got evidence that they are racist, and they should be called out. Racism sucks, no matter what color it is or what direction it goes. So I just turn the tables on those people.
Right.
And I don't care what the consequences are.
And rightfully so.
Yeah. So that's an example of how, I tried to play nice with people for the longest time, but I finally realized that, no, this is nonsense. It's just this kind of treatment is becoming widespread, and it is the cause of many people with views like mine silencing themselves because they're not as courageous as I am.
Yeah. You mentioned that earlier, especially about people and having careers and jobs.
Right.
I know when you started this podcast, you and I get along in many levels because I think we speak our mind. Also, if my job were to come and tell me that I can't speak my thoughts on my free time when I'm not on the clock, then I don't really want that job.
Right.
Because, no job owns you after you get out of the office when you're not representing them somewhere. So I am more
But a
open.
lot of people don't have the wherewithal or the confidence to think that they can replant themselves elsewhere.
No, absolutely. And we actually, sorry, I didn't just a camera to you at that time, but Mike and I actually had this very conversation that where, when we first came up with this idea for this podcast, one of our biggest concerns,
Was your
Mike's
employers?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll let Mike explain.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was very adamant at that time, even though we were a couple of drinks in. I wanted to emphasize that because you know how tempers rise and, we get a little expressive. But yeah, we had a touchy topic, which I thought was a touchy topic, that, and you know,
Leave that topic off.
Yeah.
For
yeah.
now.
So yeah.
Play it safe.
Yeah, so basically it's just a off the tables kind of conversation that I would not want to, you know.
Well, I don't think so. It's off the table conversation. I think it's something that can be problematic if your job is very woke or run by a very woke HR. But I'll let you continue.
Yeah, and particularly if you don't finesse the conversation the right way.
Right.
You know, but even so, even when you do, sometimes people don't care about
Yeah.
things like that. And
Right.
even though you didn't say something that's technically wrong, that you would even give a platform to that question,
Or to
people
that
will
thought.
complain about.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not a discussable issue. That's
Right.
that's been resolved in our culture already. That's a negative idea, and we don't give negative ideas platforms.
That's exactly why I bring it up. I don't think it's off the table. I don't think anything is just off the table to discuss with mature people.
Right, but if you're
in an
afraid
intellectual
about your
way.
employer, then it's off the practical table,
Yeah.
and you shouldn't put it on the table. If
Right.
you're worried about your job and you don't have the wherewithal to easily move around like people like Joe Rogan, he doesn't have to worry about it. But you
Yeah.
know, you're not him yet. I say yet because I have high hopes for you guys.
Thank you, but thank you. I appreciate that. Mike, you were saying your concerns at that time.
Well, the concern that you had was how I said it in one way and didn't quite express it in the same manner. Where
Right.
we had our technical difficulties of not actually getting it in data.
Right.
But overall, yeah, I definitely was concerned.
So just to clarify, sorry to cut you off again. What we were talking about is that Mike and I had a private conversation, just having a couple of drinks and discussing something, and he was very vocal about his opinions about a matter. And then when we went on, when we were recording, went on air, that topic came up, and he was so eloquent the first time. I'm like, okay, so go ahead and like just ask the same question again, and in 100 different ways, and he would not budge from his opinion and from what he was saying. And again, he wasn't being untruthful. He was just saying it the same way as he did before, or
As
as
being more cautious,
more
thinking that
cautious.
this is going to be public.
Exactly.
Of course, that's prudential.
Yeah.
CYA principle.
Yes, but my question is that what kind of society are we creating or are we building if common speech, if someone just speaking their mind is now criminal or is being policed? I feel that is the first thing that this country was built upon, and we are now rewriting what principles we uphold as Americans, as free people. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree. I think it's absolutely crucial. I mean, you know, the law in this country is, in my opinion, good for the most part when it comes to free speech. Unlike in Europe, there are far greater restrictions on free speech in Europe. You know, comedians can actually do jail time
Right.
for what's considered hate speech. And, you know, the criteria for hate speech are determined by woke culture.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's not really the same thing as, you know, Nazi propaganda, right? That sort of thing. So it's a difficult issue of how to really differentiate between speech that is likely to directly and immediately cause harm and speech that is not. So inciting to riot or fire called out in the
Right.
theater, or some kind of remarks connected with terrorisms on airplanes and things like that, whatever. You know, those are cases that we've already established. But so how to differentiate between them and, like, you know, there are things that anybody with a view on the right, folks on the left, will say that that's hate speech. They're on the alt-right.
Right.
Anybody who's on the right, that's the alt-right, and the alt-right is a kind of slippery slope into Nazism, and it's like Nazi adjacent, you
Right.
know. So it's like a spectrum. It's a slippery slope, and we can't give it a platform. But really, you know, it's not necessarily anything like Nazism. So, this is a gray area where to draw the line, and should the line be moved? I don't think it should be moved at all. I think the laws are great the way they are, but there's tremendous movement in our culture to change the laws and to make, non-woke speech, all of it, hate speech. And that's absurd.
Yeah, the extreme woke is also a minority, right? And I don't mean the minority as people of color. I mean
the numbers.
The numbers. The far left is a minority in numbers. Should the laws be changed for the majority for a minority?
Yeah, I don't think so. No, absolutely not. But even if they were a majority, we don't live in a majoritarian society.
Okay.
Because, if the majority wanted to revert back to slavery and they voted for it, right, that would still be wrong, right? So we are a republic, not a pure democracy. So we have representative government and we have laws that enshrine rights, right? The Constitution and the Bill of Rights protect individuals from majority rule, right? So there are some things that we can't make legal just because a majority wants to vote for it. We can't trample on individual rights. That's important. The right to free speech, the right to assembly. And that's why some of those people who are COVID deniers, some of them are lunatics that you mentioned, Mike, but that's adjacent to the issue of freedom of assembly, that people are, really pissed off that they can't assemble, but, woke mobs can go protest and have massive assemblies, but, they can't go to church. And I have really smart philosopher friends who argue that in favor of that political protest is significantly important enough to make an exception about freedom of assembly. But there's a church in Bensonhurst that I've gone to in the past for weddings and funerals and things like that. It's on Bay Parkway and 60th Street, St. Athanasius. It's huge. They could fit 700 people in there, but they were only allowed to have 10 people. That just seems unfair, right? So that's a freedom of assembly thing. But these are rights, right? So even though, this principle, there's two general principles, rights and harms, right? So for a libertarian, right, we have rights. The only right that we don't have is to initiate violence or harm, so fraud or force against each other, right? Am I actually harming you if I go out without a mask on? This is a very slippery topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need a lot of scientific evidence.
Yeah, it's not the same thing. The state had paternalistic arguments. Paternalism is the state acting like a parent. In loco parentis, that's another Latin phrase, in the place of the parent. So when they forced us to wear seatbelts or motorcycle helmets, they could do that, even though they're interfering with your individual freedom, because if you don't wear a seatbelt in the course of an accident, you're less likely to be able to control that vehicle as it's spinning out of control. So then you're more likely to hurt other people. Same thing with the helmet. If you have an accident, you'll be in worse shape, and it's going to cause a lot more money for insurance and medical emergency vehicles and all that stuff. So that's indirect kind of harms that justify those paternalistic intrusions or invasions on your rights to be left alone, right? So, but with the mask laws and social distancing laws, libertarians are up in arms about that stuff. It's my decision. And if you're afraid of catching the germ, stay away from me. That's their attitude. And you don't have to be a COVID denier to have that attitude, but the two groups overlap because the COVID deniers don't want to deal with masks. And the libertarians are up in arms about, having their businesses shut down. There's a guy in Staten Island with the bar. Did you see it was in the news in the last few days?
Yeah, Mark or something like
Max's.
Max's.
Yeah, he didn't want to shut down. He had a secret side door. Somebody reported him. Nice person, right? But then people think they're doing their social duty by reporting somebody who is getting people sick, He refused to shut down, and he wound up crashing into a sheriff or something when he was trying to escape. I don't know.
He was caught on video pressing on his gas, hitting a sheriff, not, you know, not badly, but just like running the car into the sheriff. And there
No, I
was
didn't see the
the
video,
funny
but
thing is that there was I think on the Daily Show, Trevor Noah did a bit on this, and the bit was called, it was like a 6-minute bit, like, you're so lucky that you're white. Because if that guy was black, he'd be dead right now. And then this guy was released without bail, and then Fox News put him on the news as a hero. So when a black person, like his thing was like, when a black person goes out during COVID, or throws back tear gas shots at the police when they're being hit with tear gas, those are riots. And granted, sometimes they are. But those are rioters. Those people are animals. But this guy on video just hit a sheriff with his car, and he's released without bail, and he's a hero. So there is dual standards there. Yeah.
There are certainly disparities, not only in the way that some cops treat some individuals, and it's also based on the circumstances and everything. I'm not going to try to adjudicate cases here, but and the media's reporting of things is also extremely biased by ideology, depending on what venue the media is. But yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that actually. I find it interesting that anytime that there's a Trump rally, and I'm sure some of the audience members who will be watching us will think that I'm probably super right wing, and I'm not at all. I'm very much in the center, and it's funny to me that as soon as there's a Trump rally or some Proud Boys meeting, there's always a tracking of how many COVID-related deaths infection rate has gone up,
or Hasidic Jew weddings,
or funerals, or during Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
There are gatherings. There's just tons. They track it.
Yeah,
but
they don't track.
How about all the
protesters? They don't track it.
I'll take it that they were wearing masks, but
not all of them.
Not all of them are, and plus, they are all next to each other, huddled together.
That's right. They are not social distancing.
They're not social distancing, but are not a single report. No one tracked that.
This is what I mean. But you know what? Like, whether or not there's these biases that show up, right? Individuals like you and I, like if you're on the left and I'm on the right, you're not responsible for that kind of bias that's on your side, and I'm not responsible for it for the people who are doing it on my side, like Fox News or something like that, and you're, CNN or something like that. Individuals are not responsible for that. So yeah, there are these biases afoot in society, and people who occupy positions that they're biased, and so they sway things to suit their biases. It's becoming something like this, and I wrote an article about this, not a philosophy article. It's a kind of public political article in Quillette, which is an interesting online free.
How do you spell that?
Quillette. I'll send you the link. I think the name of it was Straw Men and something or other, and Viewpoint Manichaeanism or something like that. Manichaeanism is an ancient religious philosophy where there are two forces at work in the world, absolute good and absolute evil, and they're always at odds with each other, kind of like yin and yang, but yin and yang is a friendlier version of positive and negative. This is like villain and virtuous. Manichaeanism is this oppositional dualism, right? So that was the title of my article. It was about this kind of thing, that like the polarization has gotten so bad since Trump got elected in this country that people on both sides have kind of just dug in their heels, insisted we're right and they're evil.
Right.
Both sides have done this.
Yeah, that's a new phenomenon. Before it wasn't like the other person's the bad guy. Like, I mean, yeah, he believes a different thing. I believe a different thing. But those people are evil. Those people should get death threats, and those people should hit them with cars. They should, beat them up.
Right.
I mean, that didn't happen in the past.
Right. It's really gotten...
When I say past, I mean in modern history.
Right, like up until a few years ago. Yeah, it's gotten really super polarized, so that everybody who says anything, even if you're on the left, but you don't say something that's totally pro-left or pro-far left, a swarm will come out and criticize you that you're like helping the enemy.
Right.
You're helping the enemy.
And the worst part of it is that a lot of the times, tribalism has reached such...
That's a good word for it.
Yeah, such a height that most of the times, God forbid, you have a slightly different opinion from your own tribe will come after you.
That's right.
And they are more vicious than the other side.
Yeah. Well, that's going on big time. It's going on big time, much more on the left than it is on
absolutely.
the right now.
Remember
in the
Al
last few years.
Franken?
Yes.
Well, this guy was doing good things for us.
Right.
This guy was doing progressive, positive things. He's a liberal. A photo that was perhaps distasteful, sure, but like he did not do anything improper. And there was a sketch comedy where he had kissed her, but like you cannot put him in the same house as Weinstein and a person who's doing
Right.
who's doing well.
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein, yeah,
He's not a monster.
Yeah, he's doing good things
Well,
for
this was
the team.
This was the timing of the Me Too thing, the woke Me Too movement, so that any guy who had any dirt in the closet,
Right.
that's it. He's going down. That's all there is to it.
And the interesting thing is that it's not that everyone on the right asked for his resignation. It's our own side
Right.
asked him to resign.
Right.
I mean, just no regard for the work that he was doing.
Yeah, well, what the folks on the right are happy to say and happy to see is that the left eats its own.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so in that article, I tried to make a case for not doing that. That like, there are two fallacies. One is in logic and the other one is in psychology. So one's a psychological fallacy and one's a logical fallacy that I see at work in this Manichaeanism, as I called it, this hyper polarization. So in psychology, it's called the fundamental attribution error. And it goes like something like this. When I do the same thing, X, that you do, but you're on the, opposite pole from me in whatever domain of life it is, doesn't have to be politics. You're on the other team, it doesn't matter. I will attribute my doing that to some accidental circumstances that were operative at the time. Or maybe I drank a little too much, or I didn't get enough sleep, or I wasn't feeling well, or a slip of the tongue, or whatever, or the sun was in my eye, that's why I dropped the ball, whatever, right? But when my opponent makes the exact same mistake, I will attribute fundamental attribution error. I will attribute that error to a fundamental characteristic of their personality, a fixed character. They are essentially evil.
Right.
And that's why they did that. There's no excuse for it, right? When I do it, well, even if I do the same thing as them, well, that's because they did it first. I'm just defending myself. Like they lied about us, so now we have to lie about them. They're using this exaggerated propaganda about us, so now we have a right, in fact, an obligation, to use the same weapons against them. Right? And then it becomes an endless, a race to the bottom of what's justifiable when this cycle goes back and forth, where both sides are doing the fundamental attribution error about each other. And that's where we are. Now, in philosophy, the name for the fallacy, it's a logical fallacy, and it's called, well, in ordinary, like a kind of intro course on logic, we would call it just a double standard, and you've mentioned the term double standard before. But we call it special pleading. So, yes, I did X, but special circumstances I will plead about that it was my special circumstances that excused my doing it. Whereas when you did it, there's no special explanation or excuses for your behavior because you're evil, because that's fundamental attribution error. But special pleading, the example I love to give when I teach this fallacy to my students is two guys show up at the buffet counter at the same time before anyone else, and the first guy says to the second guy, let's hurry up and stock up before all the hoarders get here.
Yeah,
So, like,
That's really good.
I have an example. I mean, I'm guilty of a particular buffet incident too. When I go
Aren't
to
we
the
all?
buffet, I go straight to the snow crabs.
Just,
So do I.
I have a different example. Anytime I see someone making like a simple driving mistake, I just like yell in the car. I'm like, who the gave this guy a driver's license? 5 minutes later, I'll do the exact same thing, and I'm like, oops, LOL. Like that's the end of it.
Exactly.
But
And we were all guilty of these
right.
things. We were all guilty of them. But because of the level of polarization that has happened, each side keeps upping the ante about how much is at stake and how evil they are, right? And each side focuses on all the weakness and flaws and mischaracterizes them, caricatures them, villainizes them, and so on, and has all the rationalizations for our positions. And it's become like there's almost no real attempt to seek common ground. So polarization pushes everybody, the ones with the loudest mouths, which is a minority, on the far left and the far right. They've gotten everybody else who's adjacent to them, everyone else on the left and in the center, everyone else on the right and in the center. The people on the extremes are terrorizing everybody else with this, right? So they'll eat their own if they step away from the
Right.
far left at all, and they'll eat their own if they step away, But the left has become, they won the culture wars. So the people on the far right, the real Nazis, they lost the culture war. Nobody believes them anymore. Like, everybody knows that that's insane.
right.
Right? But nobody knows what the limits are on the far left, like communism and, all that kind of stuff, totalitarianism, thought police, speech control, all that. Like, they don't know it, like, it's not a problem, right? But, like, that's just my, making a comparison about there is a difference between the two poles. Nobody listens to the people on the far right. But everybody in the center, center right, center left, they all listen to and worry about all the accusations you're a bigot coming from the people on the far left. And that shuts everybody else up, because if you say anything, that Manichaean thing is going to eat you alive.
Right. Yeah, it's funny.
That's what that article of mine was about. I'll give you the link
send it
for
to
that.
me.
You
We'll
put
post
in
it
there.
up.
Yeah.
It's funny if you read books like 1984 or watch movies like V for Vendetta.
Yeah.
We're
in that place.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah,
I've been
we're
trying
gonna-
to get Mikey to watch V for Vendetta. He never has.
Yeah, and then we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. So what I was saying
That's
is
a good
that
podcast topic.
yeah. So what I was saying is that you think that these crazy conservatives, these Nazis, they will take power, they'll gain power, and then they will shut off free speech, and then they'll police everybody. But the closer and closer I see it, it's not them.
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite. The left. You hate your enemy so much.
You have
and
become.
you have become them.
Right. You stare long enough into the abyss.
Yeah,
It
that
stares
stares
back
right
at you.
back at you. And it's such a slippery slope. You were talking about earlier that about putting that halo on the kids, and I was saying, yeah, but what's the end goal of that? Because I feel that all the participation trophies is a result of putting halos on every kid, and I just think that
And the quality of education in this country has gone down
it's
terribly.
ridiculous. I was just telling Mike when you were telling me about that Japanese math thing. Yeah, from what math I learned when up until first grade at a different at a different school outside this country, I used that math to pretty much get through up to 6th, 7th grade in here, and that was just what I learned in first grade. It's horrifying how behind we are.
My example is not as strong as yours, but it's similar. I went to Catholic grammar school for the first 7 grades. And then we moved to Brooklyn because the projects was too dangerous for my family anymore. Now, we literally had riots and whatnot, and one riot, a couple of them that revolved right around me. So that's a topic for another.
And that's a whole podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole podcast. But I lost my train of thought. Oh, Catholic school. So yeah, the education that I got in the first through seventh grade carried me all the way through to college. I didn't have to make hardly any effort after that. When I moved to Brooklyn, I wound up going to public junior high school for the 8th grade and then public high school. Mm-hmm. It was a walk in the park compared to like the nuns. If they looked at you, my teachers were nuns, if most of them were, some of them were lay teachers, but if they looked at you, even the lay teachers, because this was old school education, if they looked at you and you weren't already making eye contact when they got to your eyes, you weren't paying attention. And then they called on you, so Niaz, tell us, what's the answer to that question? And you didn't know the answer, you got detention that day. 3 o'clock, the names came over the loudspeaker for all the troublemakers, and it'd be Niaz Mosharraf, you know? Well, usually it was Ricardo Repetti, because that was my name. Right. And then my sisters who went to the school would all hide under the desk because they had the same last name as me, my brother, the troublemaker. But yeah, but just that having to pay attention in Catholic school, that became a skill for me. If you pay attention in class, you learn.
And I'm going to leave it at that because it's getting pretty late. But I think that's a very good way to end. That a lot of things are happening in our society today that we are just, letting it happen, letting it pass by. And this is a great way for us to start this podcast. And I think the advice that we should be left with from you is that if you pay attention, you will learn what the hell is going on around you.
I'd love to add 2 things to that. Yeah. Pay attention to your doubts. So when you're hearing people say, like at some of these big meetings that we have on my college campus, and people are just like having a kind of town hall, and somebody will get up and say, well, I think that our students need to see professors who look more like them. Now that sounds at first like a good thing, right? Like it would be good if you're in an underrepresented group, that if you saw people like you who were your professors, you could connect with them, they could become your mentors, you'd have a natural ethnic affinity, whatever. There's nothing wrong with that. But like that statement, there's nothing wrong with it. But it doesn't follow from that, we should no longer hire white men.
Right.
Okay? I'm just going to get straight to the point. But like we haven't hired any white men at Kingsborough in quite a while. Okay.
I'm sure in a lot of places.
Yeah. So because everybody wants to increase their diversity profile and, get rid of that complaint, basically, so they don't get sued. And so, like, if you have a doubt about that, right, and that doesn't sound right to you, don't be afraid to explore your doubts, because philosophically, okay, this is something René Descartes, famous philosopher, taught me. Doubt and knowledge are opposites. If you have doubt, you are uncertain about something. If you know something, you're certain about it. So you can't be uncertain and certain about the same thing. So if you have a doubt, even privately, that you're afraid to express publicly, oh my God, sorry.
Okay.
That's that Italian hand thing. If you have a doubt, honor your doubts, because your doubt is the philosopher in you telling you that there's an inconsistency, there's something wrong. Don't be afraid to water those doubts. Trust your doubts. That's a thought I'd like to leave your audience with.
Thank you. This was amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Repetti.
My pleasure.
And this, just so you know, this is the first of many. We would love to have you back. It'd be an honor to have you back. Mikey, thank you for the controls, man. Appreciate it.
It's a very educational part.
Yeah, definitely very enlightening. Professor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Niaz and Mike. Thank you both.
Spend nearly 5 hours with us. This will be definitely posted in several parts. Have a good night. All right, guys, we're out. Thank you.
Thank you.